Well, hello, everybody. We're here for Valor Cybersecurity to present on CMMC, what you need to know in 60 minutes. And Greg is our presenter, and I will allow him to introduce himself in just a second. But I wanted to just give everybody an idea of who's hosting this, and that is Alliance for Hispanic Commercial Contractors. We're going to be 10 years old this year. We were formed to help Hispanic commercial contractors navigate the procurement space. Our members are contractors that pursue federal, state, and local work, private work. And we have grown our contractors from literally 80,000 a year in sales to some doing over 26 million in sales. We provide, the money that we receive for our organization, we give back to our members to help pay for financial statements, consultants, people like Greg, for example, not the full contract, but at least a 1 to 2 hours worth of time to see if you like each other, that there's a path forward. And then we're here to help navigate that space and open our networks up. We have wonderful sponsors like Chesapeake Employers Insurance, Maryland Department of Transportation, and of course, my company. But we've also had sponsors such as M&T Bank, Wells Fargo Bank, Whiting Turner Construction Company, and DeWalt Tools. So the money, we don't, even though it's technically a for-profit organization, we don't keep any of it. We give it back to our members, or we help pay for some small administrative expenses like Zoom, for example. So, it's minimal. And then the Barber Group is an affiliate of that company. In the Barber Group, we do bonding across the country. We do surety bonds. And we also do them overseas, as well as in Puerto Rico, Guam, and wherever the contract happens to be. We've been in business for 24 years so far, but we have over 60 years of experience in the industry. So without further ado, I am just going to let Greg take over. And this session is being recorded in the cloud and will be provided to those who signed up and attending today. So thank you very, very much. I'm going to exit. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen. Greatly appreciate that. It's a real honor to be here to both speak to this community, but also help to either start or continue the conversation around these important contracting requirements. Many of you guys serve into the government or support those that serve into the government, and this is one of those obstacles and issue areas we see continually growing. So we want to be a support system in helping that conversation have more clarity so that you know the path you need to take going forward for your unique organization. So love what you guys are doing and appreciate the introduction. Doing anything for 10 years is amazing. So I think it's definitely something to celebrate, and look forward to learning more about the folks in this community and the type of work that they're contracting to do. So as Karen mentioned, my name is Greg Tomchick, CEO at Valor Cybersecurity. We're based in Norfolk, Virginia, so one of the biggest military bases in the world. And we serve specifically defense contractors. And there's a term that came out in 2017 and then poked its head back up in 2019 called CMMC, or the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. This came out of the Pentagon, or the federal government, after a number of studies they did through the RAND Corporation and others on the information that was leaking, the sensitive information, the defense information that was leaking outside of the U.S. to people we did not want to get access to that information. And they started to put these requirements in contracts. There's been all types of different implications, but as of November 2025, it became a law. So we're seeing it both across the Department of Defense, Department of War. We're also seeing it across GSA, so General Services Administration, as well as Department of Homeland Security, which I don't want to get down that path, but other agencies are adopting CMMC, and it's starting with the Department of Defense, Department of War. So if you're in that space, you're probably already seeing this in your contracts. So really today we want to create clarity around not necessarily what CMMC is, because I'm happy to answer questions after that, but I want to talk about the strategies you can use that we've learned by helping more than 100 companies implement CMMC or cybersecurity into their organization to help you avoid some of the pitfalls. Oftentimes it's not what do you need to do, it's what do you need to not do. So we're going to make sure you avoid a lot of the things we see companies do before they get to us, or just some of the stories we hear throughout the ecosystem of companies you probably work with that have done it right. And we want to make sure to share those stories as well. So I think it's important to know kind of why I got into this business to start. It's a very niche area. I was a military-born kid, grew up on military bases. I saw the impact that contractors had on both my parents as they were active duty, but also on the military base that we lived on. So as a young kid, I saw the impact of the industrial base on the actual defense mission, which is important to where I'm going to take this story. But growing up on those military bases, I decided to play baseball. Ended up going to college for that locally here in Norfolk, Virginia, at Old Dominion, and then played a couple years for the St. Louis Cardinals. And throughout that process, I was always very entrepreneurial, just like many of you. You know, you come up with a needed product or service and you deliver it to a customer, whether that's the government or some type of partner that serves into the government. And about 2.5 years into that business, we had a cyber attack. So I actually felt the pain of what a cyber attack feels like on my business. And that wasn't even taking into account the legalities and the compliance that comes along with it, that comes along with CMMC, because we weren't regulated at that time. But I felt the pain of realizing something and feeling the pain of something I didn't know about. So I really want each of you to walk away with a more clear perspective on what this all means, why you should do it. Why you should do it, most importantly, and then some strategies you can walk away with to get started at a very low barrier to entry, which is ultimately what we want you to leave this session with. I don't really like the PowerPoint type presentation. I want to make this very conversational. I'm going to go through about a 20 to 25 minute overview and some strategies that you can walk away with. And I'd love to answer any specific questions you might have, specific to this community or specific to the business that you operate. That is where a lot of the answers are going to come from, are those questions. I think questions are the best answers. So we'll dive into that on the tail end of this session. There's still a lot of confusion, and that's why we're putting on this session and sessions like this. A lot of people hear the word cybersecurity, they hear the word CMMC, they hear the word IT, and it immediately makes them want to huddle in a corner. We like to make it more relatable and more actionable so you can use it as a competitive advantage. So a lot of the strategies we share today will help you use cybersecurity to win more work. And that's ultimately why we exist as a company. There's a lot of cybersecurity providers out there that don't turn it into actually a market advantage or an advantage that can help you make more dollars and grow your business. So we definitely find that balance and would love to, throughout this session, help you realize that more and more as you hear me speak. So we focus specifically on defense contractors. Over the past 3.5, 4 years, we've helped over 100 defense contractors navigate CMMC. And then I worked for other companies before that. And our team has 20 plus years experience helping companies since 2017 when these requirements came out. I was on the initial volunteer board for the Cyber AB, who regulates CMMC. So I know what the conversation is, at what this intended purpose of the requirements are, and then really the best way to implement them in order to set yourself up to be able to answer questionnaires, are you doing CMMC, or to be able to submit the required self-assessments within PIEE, and that is the current requirement along with an eventual certification. So that's a little bit of an overview. Just to break down the ecosystem a little bit, I mentioned the Cyber AB. So the Cyber AB is the one that is the accreditation body. So they accredit and train and certify auditors to be able to go out and do these audits. They certify the people on our side of the aisle, which we're readiness providers. So we help companies implement it to get ready for the audit. And so you have the Cyber AB who regulates those two parties. So those are the two parties that you're going to want to know. So you have the readiness partner, and then you have the auditor. They're two different roles. For those of you that are not 100% sure if you would pass an audit today when it comes to these requirements, which are based off of NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which many of you in Maryland may know about with their site in Rockville. I've been up there a few times, and they're doing great work. And that framework, NIST 800-171, is what the requirements are for CMMC, which is what we're talking about today. So it's important to understand the ecosystem so you can understand how to navigate it. And that's what we're going to talk about here today, specifically around why do they want you to do this? So obviously I mentioned the reports that came out that said we were leaking information into the wrong hands, which was giving other countries that we were at conflict with an advantage over us on the battlefield. So they created this for the industrial base. So every defense contractor and then eventually every federal contractor will need to have these requirements in place and have an audit. And that audit's going to be under this umbrella of CMMC. So that's what's coming. I would say the next, some companies are realizing it now, but over the next about 24 to 36 months, if you're a federal contractor, you'll see these requirements come into play. We've had clients since 2019 having the requirements already in place. So you have to figure out based off of your contract language where you're at in the ecosystem. We help companies do that whenever they have a conversation with us, and we're going to be happy to offer that to Karen and Josh and the team here to be able to consult with you guys specifically to your company to be able to answer, do we have these requirements and when can we anticipate an audit requirement coming about? Cybersecurity as a word, a lot of people think of IT security when they think cybersecurity, but really cybersecurity is the protection of digital and physical. So think of filing cabinets, cameras, your building. Cybersecurity combines those two to make sure you're protecting those on behalf of your clients in their best interest. And that's what they want you to prove through the cybersecurity maturity model certification. And that's ultimately what CMMC is all about at the end of the day. A lot of this starts with a conversation. So our main clients are shipyards, subcontractors to shipyards, and then manufacturers. So we're talking to the entire supply chain from people that produce bolts all the way up to people that produce rockets or produce aircraft carriers. And we're having conversations at every single level. So we're seeing a lot of different friction points that many of you may be facing. Do I really have to do this? How much is it going to cost? And what are the business benefits if I go ahead and get started now? Those are the biggest questions that are coming from every level of any supply chain that relates to the Department of Defense, Department of War. And I want to make sure that you have a clear answer for those specific ones. And the answer is going to be different for each of you. But I think as you go through this process, you'll be able to see whether this is relevant to you now or will be more relevant in the coming near future, so you know how to prioritize it. One of the ways this process starts is something called scoping. So this may be far away, but the first step in this process of CMMC is to understand how this applies to you and what area of your business it applies to. So we typically see about 60% of businesses that are doing federal contracting, they are just doing federal contracting. So their scope is their entire business that relates to federal contracting. And then you have about 40% that have both commercial and federal contracts. So these are not required for commercial contracts. When I say commercial, I mean like if you are working for a company, say it was DeWalt Tools. Like DeWalt Tools is not going to put this requirement on you specifically. But prime contractors like Lockheed, BAE, shipyards, and then the federal government directly will put these requirements on you. And you have to segment out your business. So you'll see in this graphic, and I'll make sure to send this around, they're creating kind of a segment of their business with the tools that they use, email, ERP type systems as a segment that this is applicable to. And you can imagine that would reduce costs if you can create a room that has compliance within it versus saying your whole building needs to be compliant. So it helps to minimize the scope, which then minimizes the time and the cost. So scoping is extremely important. If you have not done a scope and drawn a diagram very similar to this one, that would be your first step walking away from a session like this. The second step is something called, and these are kind of acronym soup, so I want to stay out of the acronyms and get very clear with you on what these terms actually mean to you. So the information related to CMMC is called federal contract information, which is just contracts and information you have as a part of the contracting process. That's CMMC level 1. CUI, or controlled unclassified, is basically sensitive government information that is not considered secret, but is considered sensitive to the industrial base. If you have something called controlled unclassified information, then you're going to be CMMC level 2. And then level 3 is for companies that are hosting systems on behalf of the government. And whether that's you or not, you really have to think about this as getting to level 1, getting to level 2, and then if level 3 is required, going that direction. You'll be able to tell what level you need to have based off of the contract clauses that you have within your current contracts. And those are in the DFAR, so Defense Federal Acquisition Requirements, which should be in all your contracts now. And if it's not, you can ask your partner, if you're a subcontractor, what those requirements are. So that's kind of the next step is, do you have CUI? Because you definitely have FCI, Federal Contract Information, if you have a defense or a government contract in today's environment. Before I get there, that is really the first step, is to understand where to apply these requirements to. And that is where a lot of companies get stuck. That's where many of you may be stuck in the process is, do I have to do this? Where does it apply? And how do I make sure to spend the next free dollar on the right implementation? And that leads us to our next step, which we'd say about 80% of companies never do when it comes to cybersecurity, is actually put together a budget of what each area within these requirements is going to cost. Most companies go out, they get an IT service provider, they mention we have these requirements, they go ahead and implement it, and they look back and they have a $100,000 bill for CMMC requirements, on their desk. And they try to measure the business impact of that, but because they're not able to prove that they did the technical implementation, because they don't really have evidence or documentation or policies, all of that 100K or whatever they ended up spending doesn't get actually repurposed to make them more money. So as you're going through the process, we walk companies and contractors through a 6-month process where we do the scope. We understand what the contract requirements are today and will be tomorrow. And then we put together a budget. That takes about 3 to 4 months to actually put that together and understand where you're at and where you need to go. Most companies just want to get to this step of proving that they have CMMC in place. The way you prove it is through documentation, evidence, and then questions and answers. Questions and answers are the answers you would give to an auditor if they asked you today, do you have multi-factor authentication in place? Or do you have an access control policy? So if they were to ask you that and you didn't have an answer to that question, you would obviously fail the audit. What a lot of companies are doing right now that is really a future huge problem area that's continuing to grow is they're signing the dotted line to say that they have these things in place, but they really don't have them in place. And what typically happens is they report that they have it in place, and then either a partner or the government sponsor asks them the questions in a questionnaire, and they then can't answer yes or no because they don't have it in place, or they say no, and they can actually fine you a False Claim Act, which is a very heavily growing area of this ecosystem for attorneys that are going after defense contractors or federal contractors for false reporting of having these requirements in place. So if you're looking for a place to start, or you're already along that journey, this is really the step-by-step process that we feel is most impactful after helping more than 100 defense contractors work through this. So just to walk through the process again. So the first thing is to scope, understand what the applicability of these requirements are to your current contracts. Make sure you understand where FCI and CUI are stored. So that's really going to be determining where that information lies and is flowing. You're going to want a budget, which is a huge part of this process, getting with your financial folks, getting with your technical folks or your technical partners, and actually figuring out how much this is going to cost before you spend on technical solutions. And then ultimately being able to prove it through documentation. Most companies may have the technical piece taken care of and the technical side of things sound, but they're still not proving it through policies, procedures, and then evidence that they're doing all the great technical type work. And when you're able to bundle that up, it becomes a package you can put within your bids and proposals. It becomes a set of responses that you can respond to partners with as they ask you throughout the contracting process. And what we're seeing today is that amendments are coming to current contracts that say, you've said you're doing this all along, go get a certification. And this session is extremely timely because as of November 2025, that certification requirement was approved, became a law, and we're now seeing contractors, I'd probably say about 15 to 20% of contractors in the DoD specifically have already done the certification, and there's more and more every day. And those requirements are rolling out to more and more contracts. So we're seeing by the end of this year, we'll have about 50 to 60% of defense contracts will have these certification requirements. And then by 2027, all defense contracts will have it within their requirement set. And then other agencies will start to honor the certification that you get. So this is honestly a competitive advantage if you do work for the Department of Defense and do work for other federal agencies. This is an extremely important kind of step in order to satisfy the requirements and then use it while the people you're competing against or competing with may not have it yet. So that's kind of the process from there. Some of the misconceptions that a lot of companies have is that they have to submit their SPURS score as a 110. A lot of companies aren't reporting at all because they feel like they have to submit a SPURS score. SPURS is Supplier Performance Risk System. For those of you that are federal contractors, you've probably heard of PIEE, or the procurement basically engine that the Department of Defense uses to report. They're requesting that all contractors, and this is every contractor that does business with the Department of Defense, submits their SPURS score within PIEE. That's been a requirement since 2019. We saw a lot of companies start to do it in 2020, and then more in 2021. And since then, it's gotten more and more popular. Before the law in November 2025, that SPURS score requirement was the only way to report. Now you can actually report through questionnaires to the prime contractors, which has been in place, but also to get the certification, which is a 3-year certification that allows you to have the badge of honor to say, we've gone through this process, we've done the right things, we satisfy these requirements before winning the contract, which CMMC as a requirement set is it's a condition of winning business. So if the contract you're going after has these requirements, you cannot be allocated dollars if you have not satisfied that requirement, which did not exist before November 2025, at least in this area. It's almost like your security clearances. If, they may give you the initial set of dollars, but if you can't prove those people are cleared, then you don't get any more money after that. They've made this a condition of award. So you actually have to submit it before they award you or start to give you dollars on a defense contract. So that's a extremely critical point from that perspective. Most companies still are not budgeting. I want to continue to reiterate that. A lot of people are just spraying dollars around to try to put out the symptom, but the root cause is having a structured standard or program around this. It doesn't need to be overbuilt. If you're a 2-person company, it can be very small, but you really want to minimize the impact. And maybe that's just getting you level 1 or creating an enclave like a Prevail or other solutions out there that make it more simple. Right now, we see every company is trying to do it on their own, and they're over implementing. They're trying to, if they're a 2-person company, they're trying to build CMMC like they were a 100-person company. And there's a lot of wasted time and energy within that process. So making sure you right size your implementation is extremely important from that perspective. So some of the strategies that we've seen, I want to talk a little bit about funding opportunities. I know, through your association, there are some opportunities for funding. We're seeing a lot of federal government developments for companies under 100 to receive kind of like subsidies or a set aside amount of dollars to be able to pay for efforts like this. Because at the end of the day, this is all about national security, and this is about protection at the end of the day of the military and the customer that you serve. So there are opportunities out there and growing opportunities for you to receive assistance on implementing this because it's best for the supply chain. But you have to ask the question to either your contract manager or other people you work with in order to get that conversation started. But we are advocates for small to medium-sized businesses because we know the importance of the small business to our industrial base. I mean, it's a significant portion. I think it's like 75, 80% of the work that gets done by companies that are subcontractors under 100. Obviously, you have the large primes who sub that out to other companies, but that's a significant part. And if we lose that or we don't do it right at that 80%, that remaining percentage is not going to be a pretty result. And we're not going to accomplish what we're out to do here, which is ultimately national security and protection of the business that you've spent so much time and energy building. We have a lot of free resources. I'm going to make sure those are available. We've come out with a free assessment if you want to understand where you are. We have a free ebook that walks you through the entire process that I've spoken with today. And we also have a free readiness course, which walks through all of these various strategies that I've discussed today. We want to put it all out there so you guys are educated on the ecosystem. Once you understand it, then you can start to take action. And we see that as an ecosystem effect. Whether we work directly with you or not, whether you go to another company or you start to share this information with your community, that really gives us the impact that we're going for. If you can share this information, help somebody start to better understand what CMMC means for both the supply chain that you feed into or oversee, but also the overall end product of what you're putting into the government ecosystem. So that's extremely important to us. And then the one thing I want to end with is a lot of business owners, when they come to me about this topic, they ask, why should I do it? And ultimately what I always come back with is, why did you start your business in the first place? Why did you start serving the federal government? A lot of people have a very clear vision or mission of why they started to serve the federal government in the first place, whether that's the Department of Defense, Veteran Affairs, whichever area of the federal government it is. I always take them back to that point because I know specifically in the defense space, they wanted to serve that ecosystem because they wanted to have a role in protection of the warfighter, protection of the supply chain. And that is what this is all about. That's what this links to. It links to mission at the end of the day of protecting the people who go downrange to protect our country, but also protects the defense industrial base, the industrial partners that ultimately feed into the ecosystem. Today, we're all supply chains. We're all connected. And if there's one weak link in that connection, or somebody says they're compliant, but they're not, that whole supply chain can be taken down at the worst possible time. And I was a cyber attack victim. I know what it feels like to actually go through the attack, but I've also helped over 1,000 companies over the years since that point go through cyber attacks. And eventually in my career, those clients who were having the attacks were the defense contractors serving into the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, and otherwise. And I wanted to find a way to help companies like yourself, help leaders like yourself be proactive in actually taking that next step. It doesn't need to be take the big quantum leap in order to get fully compliant. It's just really taking the next step, whether that's scoping, whether that's starting to put together documentation and proof, whether that's putting together a budget to get out ahead of this stuff before negative impact is realized. And that's ultimately why we exist as a company at Valor, and why I like to wake up every day and be able to serve the great community with folks like yourself, to be able to set everybody up for a little bit more clarity. And then, getting to action quicker. That's ultimately why we exist, especially in a complex topic like this. It's so hard to take action, just to take that next step. You have to have clarity through the through the fog or through all the noise that's happening in this ecosystem. So to be able to kind of clear the fog a little bit, give you guys some strategies, help meet you in the middle for the questions you may have is ultimately why we wanted to put on this session. And I'm thankful for both Karen and Josh for bringing us in. I want to take a couple minutes in between this to answer any questions. We can either do Q&A the rest of the time, or I can dive into a couple relevant topics I think may be top of mind, but would love to hear from the audience on, what type of business you're in. Maybe we can go through the comments if there are any, and be able to answer some of your specific questions.
So first, it's just something that popped in my mind, but for small to mid-sized contractors, what are the most common gaps that you're seeing between being technically compliant and actually being audit ready? And how can companies close that gap?
Yeah, excellent question. A lot of the smaller to medium-sized companies, it's a clarity of what we're implementing and then the management of it going forward. So for a small to medium-sized business, you either have a 1 to 2 person IT team internally, or you outsource to an IT managed service company. A lot of managed service companies have not caught up to be able to manage the technical compliance for you. So that is the biggest gap for small to medium-sized companies from a technology perspective. From an overview perspective, it's documentation, right? The processes and the documentation don't get prioritized. I mean, I run a small business myself, so I understand that, I'm thinking about, winning business, hiring people. I'm not thinking about how do we document everything throughout the process. But in order to prove anything, it has to be documented. They're not going to put you on a court stand and say, Greg, how are you guys doing CMMC? They're going to say, send us paperwork that shows you're doing it. So, technology gap would definitely be the management of the technology in a compliant way. Anybody can implement it, but managing it's the hard piece. And then actually documenting and proving it are really the two biggest things that we see small to medium-sized businesses facing right now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, great question.
Got another one in here. What is the cost of implementation and management?
Yep. So it's based off of users that you have. Obviously, with an IT managed service company, they're going to charge you per user. Typically, so there's 2 steps in this process. You have the readiness, so the actual implementation, and then you have the audit. The readiness for a, let's just say like on average, like 50 person company, 50 users, we typically see implementation right around 35 to 50 grand, somewhere in there. That depends on a number of dynamics. What IT service provider you're using? Are you guys all remote? Do you work in an office? So right around that $50,000 implementation cost in total. So that's like implementing all 110 of the requirements. And then the audit is typically between 20 and 30,000 to actually get the certification. Our guidance at this time is if you don't have a certification requirement in your contracts now, spend that time getting ready the right way. So making sure you have a budget, you have a little bit of breathing room, but you had to have gotten started, yesterday. It takes between 6 and 12 months to actually implement this stuff. It's not something you can turn a switch on and all of a sudden you're compliant. So it takes time. I think that's extremely important to acknowledge. But that is going to be where I see, companies just really need to get started and they need to understand where they're at in the life cycle. So are they in the process of implementation, getting ready, or do they have a certification requirement that they need to start pursuing today? And we typically see right around 75,000 just in that phase 1. So that implementation and certification, the management of it, we typically see the management of a CMMC program to be right around like 25, 35. So, let's just say 30,000 to be a round number on an annual basis. But that is a significant cost savings than hiring a full-time person. Maybe you're paying them 100 to 150K a year to manage this internally. I mean, you're seeing significant cost savings by using kind of an outsourced model. We're not an IT service provider, so we might not be included in that. But there are cost saving strategies. And a lot of times we get companies to the point where they start to see the value of this within their business. So they spend more money on it to be able to report on it better. And then they get to the point where maybe they're spending, $75K a year. Then they're like, it makes sense to hire a full-time person versus using 3 partners in order to manage this going forward. So, typically you have about 75K in that implementation phase. And then to manage it going forward, you typically are going to be, somewhere around that 30 to 40K a year mark is what we see on average.
Okay, great. We have another question here from Navido. I hope I'm saying that right. In your experience, how much time is needed to implement all the certification controls? Absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard to say that it's going to depend on the organization, but it does come down to culture and leadership. We say 6 to 12 months from start to finish is traditional. Our readiness program is 6 months as we walk through this, but that does not include the technical, actual going on the keyboard and configuring things, which can take a little bit longer in the process. We typically say 6 to 12 months. I would say on average, it's the upper side. So 9 to 12 months to get things squared away. There are strategies like if you can enclave your company. So if you can segment out your government business from, say 75% of your business is commercial. When I say commercial, I mean not federal government work. And then 25-30% is federal government. You can segment that out and that will take less time. But traditionally when we go into a room and the board has just decided we have to do something about CMMC or the leadership says it typically takes, somewhere between that 9 to 12 month mark. Obviously not taking into account the variability of how large your organization may be from that perspective. So it does take time. It's not, it's not an easy process. It's not, 3 months and you're ready to go. And that is the dark side a lot of companies are coming across is that they doubted this in the past. Then they get an amendment to a current contract where they're, being paid, maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And in order to get that next phase of the contract unlocked, they have these requirements. And those requirements were supposed to be satisfied in the past because they were signed the dotted line. And that honestly puts them in a bad situation because they can't all of a sudden implement it within that month. They get kind of behind the curve. And we've seen companies lose millions of dollars from it. Just by not taking small steps before the requirement becomes something that's in the contract.
I just want to weigh in just really quickly. I mean, we deal with a lot of small business, some micro businesses that are starting out doing federal work. And as 8A contractors, Hub Zone, Women in Small Business, Service Disabled Vets, and they don't have a lot of money. So when I don't know if you know of any grants or any funding opportunities to finance this process, or you offer that as a service, like a financing agreement, because I don't know how they're going to afford it. And it's going to really, it's going to hinder a lot of minority firms, a lot of women-owned small businesses who have even less access to capital than most. And it's just going to put a damper on small business, I think.
Yeah. You're exactly right. Yeah, that is why we focus on small to medium-sized companies. Most of the providers in our space go after the large prime contractors because they see them as the people with the money. But as I mentioned, 80% of the defense industrial base and federal government industrial base is small to medium-sized businesses. So they need strategies, they need options, like you said, Karen. They need providers that are going to meet them where they're at versus just charge them like everybody else. So there are partners like that out there that will charge kind of lower monthly rates spread out over time. And that's from the privatized perspective. So that's companies like us or IT managed service companies that can be more workable from a financial perspective versus the traditional cybersecurity consulting and compliance model is, we're going to do a 50 grand compliance program, you pay half up front, half at the end. And like you said, a lot of small to medium sized businesses can't do that with cash flow, but finding partners that can do it more small chunks monthly to be able to align with as cash flow either increases or you get paid, then you pay your bills. And there's definitely options like that out there. And then the other piece of that question is federal government kind of subsidizing or funding opportunities. Obviously, through organizations like yourself, it sounds like you guys provide some opportunities. If you guys are familiar with the SBIR program, different military branches have innovation and research type grant programs. And those grant programs have a set aside funding called TABA, so Technical and Business Administration costs. Some of you guys may have seen a flavor of these types of funds in your contracts, general and administrative costs. That could be insurance, things that are set aside to be able to pay for the costs of doing business on that contract. They are coming out with something similar to TABA for these types of critical requirements for small businesses. It doesn't exist traditionally for everybody today, but they're looking at what supply chains and what contract vehicles are most appropriate for these. The one around here, we have one of the biggest shipyards in the world here, and the federal government is looking at, through the Shipbuilders Council of America, how do we make sure that because of the fleet obstacles and the SHIPS Act, there's a lot of different federal government initiatives. How do we incentivize all of these subcontractors in the shipyards to implement these requirements to some extent? So they're using a TABA, set aside type bucket of money to say, we'll give every contractor with these, profiles, whether it's service disabled, veteran owned, or under 100 status, or 8A, whatever the different status that you may have, we're going to give them up to $50,000 to be able to implement this. And so I mentioned, about $70K for implementation, and then about $30K to manage it going forward. If you got that amount of money, whether you won the contract or per year, it would eventually start to pay for itself and help with the management or the implementation and then management. So they're coming out with something of that nature. It's obviously delayed. If you've worked in the government for a while, not everything is prioritized the way we would like it to be. And it depends on the vertical that we're operating within, if they're pushing our effort enough. But this is really, what we see at the Pentagon with some of the undersecretaries. This is something that they're very incentivized to do because they know they rely so heavily on the industrial base. And if small businesses continue to say, which they've been saying this since 2017, we don't have the funds to actually implement this, so we can't do this at this time. And you get these two parties looking at each other like, we don't have the money for the requirements, and they're like, still do the requirements. But there wasn't a law in place. And now that there's a law, it becomes real for the government to step in and say, how do we use tax dollars to actually subsidize and fund this national security effort? So those things are coming about, and we're happy to keep you guys updated. Depending on which federal government agency, or specifically if it was the Department of Defense, which branch you work with, each of them have their own flavor of grants and funding opportunities for these efforts. So it's hard for me to blanket and say just use this grant or this funding source because they all have set aside buckets of money, but you have to ask them the specific question in order to unlock that money. And you have to be able to ask it in a smart way that says, we're making these efforts, we're doing what you want us to do, but we're looking for some ways that we can work together to fund, the steps we've taken and the steps we're going to take to benefit all involved. So it's really, you have to advocate for yourself. We help a lot of our clients do that on their behalf because this is not their expertise area, and really get the process started. So those are a couple funding opportunities. It's really going to depend on which agency you operate at and, what branch you operate at, if it's in the Department of Defense. But it becomes specific when you get into those different agencies and pools of money. Great question. Appreciate that, Karen.
Sure,
I see.
John. Yeah, you have.
I was going to say, I see one more in here from Brad. I'm sorry, John Bradley. Where are companies actually failing assessments?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. They're failing it in the evidence to prove they're doing certain technical measures the right way. So, for example, companies monitor their laptops, and those activity logs, so somebody accessing a file in your company or going to this website, those logs go into your IT service provider, and they are able to monitor activity to see if anything looks out of the ordinary. A lot of times companies will just say, we use Sentinel-1 to monitor our laptops. But what they don't do is take that next step. And most IT service providers will not do this on your behalf. You have to be able to do it yourself or find an IT service provider that can do this. Is they will pull screenshots from that tool to have evidence for an auditor to actually prove that they're doing it. So that is the biggest. I would say that word is what I would walk away with. Why companies are failing is the being able to prove that you have this stuff in place. We've seen both companies that don't have any of the technical stuff in place, but have the documentation great. And we've seen companies with every bit of technology in place. They're doing everything they're supposed to do, but they can't get the documentation together and the evidence. So that word prove, I think, is where a lot of companies that we've seen fail audits. That's where they fail. But I guess the pro and the con there is the auditor is always willing to come back. They're going to be probably based on an hourly work type contract. So they're happy to come back and audit you based on the delta. So that's definitely a positive. But that documentation lift is heavy. So you have to make sure, you're kind of implementing technically and then proving it along the way. And those two things need to kind of work in conjunction versus be separate. A lot of companies say we need to spend all this money on technology and then we'll document it later. Those two things should happen in concert or in a coordinated fashion. And once you get started, it's not hard. That's why a lot of companies are running to GRC tools like Future Feed and other. But those are just systems of record. Most of the times, those don't do evidence gathering. So you're right back in the same position. We just had our 7th company go through the audit process. Obviously, we've been in this space a while. So we've had one company that we put through it that had an open item after the initial audit. And that was a technical component that wasn't configured exactly right because it changed as the business made changes between implementation and the audit. But outside of that, we specialize in the proving of it. So as we walk companies through this process of budgeting, of scoping, of proving it, of documenting everything, working with the IT folks, we think about what's being done and how can we prove this going through it. And that is kind of a mindset and perspective shift that your organization or who's ever responsible for this has to get in that muscle memory of how do we prove this? How do we prove that we spent this dollar on multi-factor authentication and we're going to prove it in an audit? So that provability is really the word I keep going back to because that's where companies are failing the audit and then have to try to reprove everything that they've implemented over again, which takes a lot of time and unnecessary dollars.
And we've got a question from D here saying government is saying you need to have CMMC level 2 certified by the end of the calendar year. Do you think they will push out the date?
Yeah, it's a great question. I definitely can't predict the future. We've seen that language in many other contracts. They want you to be level 2 by the end of the year. The risk you take by not doing it is for them to actually stick to their word. What's happened in this ecosystem, because this came out in 2017, it kind of poked its head back up and became official in 2019 and then 2025, is a lot of people are calling the government's bluff. You've been telling us since 2017, we have to have this in place. There's been no repercussions for the companies that potentially false claimed or lied about it. They haven't received any implications. They're still receiving government work. I point to two things. As a business owner myself, I've had defense contracts and had these requirements in the past. And I would rather get further along in the implementation and then be able to use it as a way to win more work. I do see companies all the time win a contract over another provider because they are able to prove that they're doing this better than the other company. That's just the nature of doing business. If they're looking at two packets, same proposal, maybe AI produced it or not, one has a cybersecurity letter with a nice write up on what they're doing to align with these requirements. They're going to pick the one that has done the little bit extra due diligence and proves that they have these requirements in place. So that competitive advantage is hugely important. The other thing is, the thing that keeps us up as business owners or as executives and leaders is the possibility that they stick to their word and do it by the end of the year, but you called their bluff, so that by the end of the year, they say, you need to have the level 2 certification we told you at the beginning of last year. Going into next year, we're not going to release any funds on this contract that's specific to you until you show us the certification. And because we work down here in Norfolk, Virginia, where there's a lot of special operations, obviously the shipyards are mission critical. We have seen tens, 20 different companies that have gotten amendments that say, we're at phase 4 of this contract. We're going to unlock, the next 2.5 million. Prove that you have CMMC level 2 in place. We've been telling you this for the last 2-3 years. And they either have to say, we're not interested in this work, or we need more time. And sometimes they will not give you more time. And to be able to back down and say, we don't have these requirements in place, so we have to pass on this opportunity, is extremely painful. So think about that $2.5 million loss versus spending, 50 to 100 grand over the, next, 12 months, or if you've already gotten started, if you got started last year, 24 months, however much time you're putting into it, you're saving a significant amount of that risk gap between that 100,000 and that 2.5 million, depending on what type of contracts you do. We've helped companies on both sides. So we've helped companies after the fact, they've already lost that 2.5 million because they didn't have this in place, and now they're going to start getting it in place so they don't lose any further. And we've also helped companies avoid losing that contract because they did some things proactively and started the process early enough. So that's kind of the risk that you're putting yourself into. A lot of companies assume level 2. If you have level 1 and you can prove it and you're working toward level 2, it's a lot easier through the process. A lot of companies see level 2 and they don't do anything because they see the depth and the breadth of these requirements. So, what we encourage folks to do, whether you use a provider like us or not, is just get started, have the conversation internally, figure out what you need to do next. And then, it's going to make the process a lot easier. But that 2027 date is them putting the stake in the sand to say, this is a law and we want you to do it by a specific date, call our bluff or align with our requirements. Either way, it can shake out to be very detrimental if you don't do it. And that's not, fear mongering or a threat. We've just seen people lose dollars. And we want to see people prosper and ultimately use this as a competitive advantage because we know it's something that can unlock dollars on more sensitive type contracts that you want to go after or that you already hold.
And then she added that she recently attended a Navy SB webinar and confirmed that they will not be awarded unless you are CMMC level 2 certified.
Yep. Yeah. Condition of award. They've talked about condition of award for many years, but it's now, right in front of us where they're actually saying and then taking action on, if you don't have it in place, we will not give you the award. So they're holding to their promise most of the time, which gives us more variability. But like I said, depending on which branch you're working with, what agency at the federal level you're working with, they will tell you clearly, this is the requirement by the state. And, obviously Navy, Army, Air Force are kind of ahead of the curve when it comes to Department of Defense. But, if you have the requirement, might as well do the implementation the right way. And that's where we always take companies is if you have the requirement, start to think slow and act fast versus what happens a lot of times is you hear that at a small business event, you start to think really fast and that causes slow action because you're getting confused. You're looking at all the different providers, trying to make sense of the ecosystem while you're operating a business and doing your normal activities. And that can be a recipe for disaster. I know that as a business owner, I know when I don't see things clearly, it can really create a lot of confusion, which creates inaction. So we really, through sessions like this and also, other small business type events, you can start to kind of think slow and make sense of it based off of how it's relevant to your business and then start to take action. And, we have all the resources and the ecosystem has all the information out there for you to take that action.
I just need to interject. We're almost at our time here. We have 2 more minutes. For those contracts that require surety bonding, performance and payment bonds, it's going to be important that you confirm with your bond broker, such as like me, for example, Josh D, who's on the call, that you are CMMC compliant. Because if you award a contract and you're not getting paid, then you can't pay your labor, your suppliers. There'll be a default under the bond. And as you know, most small businesses personally guarantee their business. So with surety bonds, it's not insurance. If we have to step in for a default and we have to pay out on a default, we are going to ask you to pay us back. And then once you're put in default, getting bonding again is going to be near impossible. So be really careful about that before you sign or agree to providing a bond for that project and bow out before the 7-day notice to proceed is issued. So there's just a little food for thought there. It's could create a losses for you and the surety industry. But I think this is great. This presentation was recorded, Greg. However, it's going to be a little choppy because of my inability to make it work in the beginning, but I think it'll be fine. And then you have handouts that you said you're going to give to everybody.
Yes.
And we can do that via email. We have 13 people on the call and we have more registered. So we'll get that out to all the attendees that registered and who are on the call.
And really quick, what's the best way to get a hold of you and your team, Greg? Should someone want to bring you guys on for their services? And what's the best way to get a hold of your book?
Yes.
Yeah, please put it in the chat too. So if one of your people have the ability to do that.
What I can do. So definitely, to reach out for a conversation, Valor, VALOR -cybersecurity.com. That's going to be the best way to schedule a meeting with us. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can search Greg Tomchick on LinkedIn, connect with me, reach out through direct message. And then to get the book, I can send a link. There's also a link on my LinkedIn where you can go and purchase the book. Would love to get that in your hands. Any of your loved ones, family members that want to understand the risks of cybersecurity and AI and technology and where the world's at. We wrote this book for those individuals. So we'll make sure you have a link to the book. Would love to have a conversation. We don't have calls to hard sell. We're very educational. If it makes sense for us to partner, then great. If not, we want to give you all the information you need to set yourself up for success and use the hard lessons we've learned to benefit you and your team. So would love to be a support system. Extremely honored to be here and speak with you guys. This is a topic I'm deeply passionate about. I've built a team around it and we get to positively impact people every day. And it's just an amazing opportunity to help the world in the way that we like to do it, and appreciate everything you guys do, whether it's the defense industrial base or the federal contracting ecosystem. Greatly appreciate everything you guys do to help elevate it.
You're welcome.
And push the mission forward.
You're very welcome. You can hear the passion in your voice and the concern for small business, which you don't hear too often these days. It's like bipartisan politics don't even exist anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's nice to hear somebody promote small business where, it's everybody says we're the backbone of America, but we just have no spine in Congress these days.
Yep.
So I really appreciate your time. And again, I'm sure everybody really loved the presentation. Greg, you did a wonderful job. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. And we'll look forward to those handouts too.
Perfect. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Josh. Appreciate everybody.
All right.
Thank
Have
you
a
very
great
much.
rest of the week, everybody.